That's what it always just comes down to, right? Your tissues have a certain capacity. Your nervous system, your body, your tissues has a certain capacity to withstand a certain amount of load or stress. And that injury, that pain comes in when you surpass that threshold. And that's the way to just really break it down and think about it from a standpoint of whether you are a weekend warrior or whether you are an elite professional athlete as well. There's just something going on there, whether it's your training load just got too high over time, you didn't account for enough recovery, or you just got really gung-ho at New Year's with your New Year's resolution and you're like, I'm going to hit the gym 5 times a week and I'm going to do this. And that came from previously doing nothing at all. I think that's the simplified version and way to think about that.
Hi, I'm Lauren Parsons.
And I'm Andy Jackson, and this is the All Well Co podcast.
Dive deep with us as leading experts share their unique perspectives on topics such as recovery, sleep, movement, and the latest innovations in the space. So welcome to the All Well Co podcast, Vikash. Before we dive into your journey, let's set the stage a little bit. Can you share how we first met and what drew you to the All Well Co community?
Yeah, no, most definitely. I think honestly, I forgot how many years it's been now. I know, Andy, you and I have just been kind of like, active on like Instagram, just kind of like, messaging back and forth here and there, like sharing posts and things like that. And I think that came through like Vivo Barefoot initially.
Always their fault.
Yeah.
What's that?
It's always their fault.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a brand that, I've been on board with for quite a while, just, being a physical therapist and somebody who works with a lot of runners, and kind of understanding where like the state of the running shoe industry is at the moment. I'm a big proponent of, getting people into minimalist footwear. And I think just, as a result of that, Andy and our paths kind of overcrossed each other a little bit. And we've stayed in contact over the years. And then I think, from that, this kind of naturally and organically came about.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that support. It's really vital to brands like Viva Barefoot that professionals like you are talking about it. So yeah, thank you very much for that.
Of course.
So let's dive into your story a little bit. What inspired you to launch Perfect Stride? And I'm really interested to know, how did your vision for it differ maybe than other physical therapy models out there?
Yeah, this is one, I feel like I'll mention a lot to kind of like my colleagues or the staff at like Perfect Stride, just so like, kind of always giving the origin story, I guess, if you will. It started back in 2012 when I just started practicing as a physical therapist. Fresh out of school, very like gung ho, let's go save the world, and then I get thrown into, this high volume environment, which I think a lot of people are familiar with in physical therapy clinics, where it's myself, the physical therapist, and I'm working with, at a minimum two, but then three, four. I remember the one day I kind of think I had the tipping point. It was 5 patients at one time.
Yikes.
Yeah, it wasn't ideal and kind of like very disheartening, I think. I kind of like had this whole picture painted in my head. I think PT school kind of paints this picture in your head a little bit as well. And then kind of like I come out of school and I realized, hey, I'm not really getting to use any of like my clinical reasoning here. It's kind of more of like a exercise in multitasking, if anything, just trying to make people feel like they're getting the most value out of this situation as I'm juggling them around. So, I think there was a moment there where the clinic manager at the facility that I was working with kind of like, sensed the frustration I was speaking of. And I think he himself also kind of was experiencing it too. So, we kind of put our heads together and thought about, hey, like, what can we do to address this problem, right? Because it's a problem on both ends. It's a problem on the practitioner's end because this is where we get a lot of burnout in the physical therapy industry, right? That's, I think, one of the biggest complaints from physical therapists is, hey, I'm just feeling very burnt out about having to treat like, 14, 16, 18, 20 plus people in a day. And then also from the patient side as well, it's like, they're not getting the best experience that they could. And that's something we kind of like, thought about a little bit. And at that time in New York City, the one-on-one model, like cash-based out of network, it was around, but it wasn't necessarily as prevalent as it is today. I feel as though today it's like, kind of becoming the norm a little bit. But at a point it wasn't. So we kind of like put our feet out there and we're like, all right, let's try this. Let's try a little controlled dose and see how people respond to this. So, while we were working our full-time jobs, we got a sublease out of a chiropractic office for the hours after our work shift. So we were working like 7 p.m. to like 10:30 p.m. Just doing like a kind of, I guess, like we call like a side hustle at that point. And just seeing how well people responded to this. And it was pretty instantaneous. Like right out of the gates, we saw, people were getting better quicker. They were enjoying their experience. We were enjoying just kind of this new experience ourselves because we got to assess, reassess, use our clinical reasoning skills a lot more. And overall just saw how this was beneficial to all parties that were, involved in this. So that kind of started growing very quickly. Within the first few months, we were subleasing just like a tiny little space. We moved into our own independent space. And then within the next year, we kind of moved into a larger clinic space and, started hiring staff on top of that as well. And, it's 13 years later and here we are.
Congratulations.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Now, your company is called Perfect Stride. What I'm really interested in terms of that term is, what does perfect stride mean to you beyond just, say, for example, gait and movement?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, initially, like, where the name came from was, we were, initially it was like kind of, hey, we want to work with the runners of New York City. We want to build this community a little bit more. And that's kind of like where the name came from. But I think it's kind of over the journey itself, I think it's kind of had like a different meaning now where I think that, it is about the journey, the term perfect stride, right? Like we know that perfect is elusive. We're never going to actually like get to perfect. But it's always that pursuit of perfect, right? Like assessing, reassessing things, whether it's our philosophy, our treatments, equipment, software, how we work with our clients. And I think it just shows that like the quest and the consistent work that you put in chasing perfect is the perfect. And that's kind of like, what I've kind of started to evolve as like the meaning of where the name comes from when people ask me now. Before it was kind of just a very simple like, oh yeah, we work with runners, so this is geared towards runners. But I think kind of like over time now, like clients have come in themselves and talked about like, oh yeah, I'm here to get my perfect stride, and my answer to that has kind of like I think evolved to make me understand what I think the name of the company stands for now as well too, because I always tell my clients in the clinic there's no such thing as a perfect stride, right? It's very unique to each individual, and those things are going to change over time based upon injuries that may come along, the way that your body changes, the constraints that you have within your training cycle may change those factors a little bit as well. So I think that the key is now just understanding that it's just that pursuit of being better and being consistent.
Yeah, I like that. It's very aspirational. It's I was trying to put it in context of myself, and in terms of, I think I've had some issues around my hip and hip pain, etc. And it's interesting when I'm speed walking, if I get the perfect stride, it takes away the pain. So when I saw that about your name, I thought, okay, and it is very, very, very individual. Let's jump a bit deeper then. So your clinic is known for combining traditional physical therapy. You spoke a little bit about that, with performance coaching and long-term movement health. So how are you bridging that gap between rehab and performance? Because generally in the world, those things are very separate.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I think there's a lot of these like divides that are in our healthcare system, and I think there's a divide that used to be there from train rehab to training, from your traditional medical infrastructure system of seeing your physician, seeing your orthopedist, and then rehab as well, right? The thing that I think is beautiful is over the past 5 years or so, I think there's been a lot of innovation and a lot of trending in the direction where I think physical therapists are kind of getting better at understanding the demands of sports performance and bridging that gap a little bit better now too. Because I remember before, in the industry, it's very common to kind of be like, hey, you can run for 1 minute without pain. You're good to go now, right? That's like kind of all I got for you. I don't really know where to take this any further. But I think now what's happened is like, where physical therapists are doing much better about bridging that gap and understanding, hey, these are the demands of what your sport are. Like, let's say running. Let me kind of work with you to get to that place where we can check off all the boxes and definitively say, yes, we have gotten you to a place, not just where you can perform pain free, but we've worked with you to optimize your body, your health ecosystem as well, to get you the best results and also set you up for kind of long-term success as well. There's this kind of big quote that goes along in, what what I dub this kind of like performance therapy in the performance therapy industry of rehab is training in the presence of injury, right? So I think we use that philosophy at Perfect Stride a lot, and just thinking about that at any given time, you can walk into Perfect Stride and see that, hey, like it looks like this person might be going through a training session, but they're actually like, working through like their physical therapy session here and kind of trying to get back to performance as well.
And is that working the other way? Are the performance coaches starting to understand the power of therapy a bit more? Because I've always felt that, let's say, more traditional coaches will say, "Hey, my athlete's injured. I need you to get them back in 4 or 5 days," and it's almost a hierarchy that the performance coach, the strength and conditioning coach, is the lead. And I've seen friction. They say, "Well, how come you haven't fixed them to get them back at that time?"
There can be. I think that's where kind of like the quality of professionals you're working with kind of comes into play as well too. Um, like just like I'll say, there's bad physical therapists, there's bad personal trainers, there's bad orthopedists. Every industry kind of like has its goods and its bads for sure. I think communication is key there. I have plenty of like coaches, trainers here in New York City that I trust fully because I've worked with them over the years. I understand their knowledge and their philosophy, and I think at the end of the day, it comes down to just understanding the scope of what's happening and doing no harm to the individual that you're working with, right? I think a lot of trainers are very, very well versed in the world of human movement, right? They can
Yeah.
help their clients troubleshoot things, give them progressions, regressions, offloading strategies, and things of that nature. And, I think that's amazing. But then, there's a certain point where it's like, hey, maybe I've utilized everything in my tool belt and
Mhm.
we're still kind of like running into this roadblock here with this pain that we're getting, this limitation that we're getting, and we kind of need to pass this individual along. And then same for myself, generally, like I do have a strength coaching certification as well. So I am like, able to work with these people to help bridge that gap. But there's certain points too where I realize, hey, you know what, like, let's get you kind of like working with this performance coach who I know works with this
That's
population
great.
and can kind of
Yeah.
get you better more, right? Whether it's like, you know, somebody who may be pregnant, whether it's somebody who may be, coming back from X injury or somebody who's going to X sport. If I get somebody who's a professional like volleyball player, hey, I can definitely get you to a certain place. I can develop all your characteristics and your skills so that you're able to move really well. But when it comes to maybe some of those sports specific skills and movements,
Yeah.
there might be somebody else that's a little bit better to work with you at that point.
Hmm.
That's great to hear that it's much more symbiotic and that you're working together. That's
Yeah.
really that's good. That's good.
It's also awesome to hear on the change in the industry because I would
Mm.
agree with you, at least, a couple years ago, in my experience, unless you have that sports medicine focus, as a PT or a chiro, it seemed like, and I don't want to offend anybody, but they could get you about 70 to 80% of the way there. And then you're like, well, I'm used to, operating at this certain level. I still have pain. I can lift my arm, but, it's more of a rehab than a performance kind of solution. So that's really cool to hear. So you've mentioned the word or the words clinical reasoning a couple times. I'm really interested to hear what makes your assessment process different from a typical PT clinic. Is there anything you do specifically that guides it to stand out?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, right? I think there's a lot of talk out there about like protocols and kind of like, just standardized approaches. And I think that's something like we don't necessarily kind of like jive with that Perfect Stride, because every individual is different, right? You can't just have like one protocol and kind of insert everybody into that scenario there. It's good to kind of have your like bumpers, kind of like thinking about bowling, right? It's good to have like your bumpers on there so you can kind of play within a certain zone and have some guidelines. But I think every person is just such a unique story. And I think that's where kind of our assessment process shines a little bit, where, one of the other big quotes that we always have at the clinic is 2 ears, one mouth, right? It's kind of like, if you kind of truly listen to this individual that's coming to you, that has a pain point, that has a story to tell, you'll get most of the information from them without really having to go through your assessment. They'll tell you their story, they'll tell you what's been going on. And then you may just need to kind of come in there, keep them on track and guide them a little bit. But I think just being able to listen to the individual goes so far. And that's where I think our healthcare system falls apart a little bit. There's I forgot exactly what that number is. There's some research studies out there talking about like, how quickly do physicians interrupt their patients during their visits, and it's somewhere in that like 10-ish second range, right? Which
Yeah.
which isn't great. Somebody's
Yeah.
coming to you, they have a problem, they're really kind of trying to like, come to you, try to trust you to solve their problem, and you're kind of just interrupting them right from the get-go. So that's where we kind of will like, make sure that we're kind of allowing them to have the floor space to voice their concerns, make sure they're being heard. And we do that at every session. Our goal, we sit down in the beginning of every session. We'll kind of like, talk to them about, hey, how was your weekend? What did you do? Just those questions where we're kind of like, just kind of like getting friendly with them, developing that rapport can kind of give us information, right? They'll tell us like, hey, I had a friend in town. So we did X, we did Y, we did this. Oh, so like, you did quite a lot of things. Like, did your step count go up over the weekend as well, right? So then we can kind of like get into the nitty gritty a little bit more and learn, hey, maybe you are having that flare up a little bit because typically you've been taking X amount of steps a day. And now since your friend was in town, we kind of skyrocketed to 2X, and now your foot's a little bit more inflamed, which makes sense. And like we can get on board with that when things make sense as well. So I think that part of it is really important. And we always do that on the tail end of our sessions too. We'll sit down, recap what we've done, what are the expectations of our client, until the next time that we see them as well. So we're all on board with what the plan is to get them to their goals and achieving their goals as well.
Yeah.
I guess
That's
it's
wild,
just,
isn't it?
it is called physical therapy.
Yeah.
It's called therapy. So that's,
Yeah.
that makes complete sense.
Yeah. And that's wild to hear on the 10-second thing. Although I think it just
What do you mean?
highlights a
Someone
little bit.
interrupts you after 10 seconds.
Well,
What are you talking about?
yeah, Andy never does that. Well, it just highlights a bit of a broken model, right? When you have 10 to 15-minute appointments, they're trying to check boxes, right? They're trying to make sure that they can fulfill those obligations. So
Exactly.
yeah, it's a bit of a bummer. So you, in all the research we've done, you like to integrate technology, manual therapy through a coaching lens. So I'm really interested to hear what tools and modalities are you most excited about right now, and why?
Yeah, kind of thinking about that a little bit. I think the first and obvious answer that comes to my mind is like, like I mentioned, we really try to think about kind of like people's like lifespan, health span, thinking longevity, right? Kind of just throwing out all the current buzzwords that are out there around like longevity. But that's something we've always been doing is like, how do we set up this individual for long-term success? So I'm kind of excited. And I think in the near future here, we're going to be integrating VO2 max testing into
Whoa.
Perfect Stride. And I think that's going to be a fun thing, especially for our runners. It's kind of like a natural, kind of like synergistic kind of a service to have because for our runners, it allows us to be able to clearly help them define like what zones they should be running in and kind of what those times should be for those zones for them according to their heart rate. So I think that'll be a very exciting thing in that respect. But then also, we know that VO2 max is kind of like the single biggest predictor of longevity or of aging kind of successfully over time. So I think that'll just be just a great kind of, like I said, synergy to what we do already. And now giving us a little bit more data to kind of help people and understand like, hey, this is where you're sitting right now. Maybe for your kind of like age group, like this is where we need to be, or hey, we have some opportunities to improve this, let's train this and come back and measure it at a later time to kind of clearly see how we're kind of changing the physiology of this individual, how are we improving them as well. So I think that's a really cool kind of like piece of technology that we're looking forward to bringing in house. And then
What are
recently
you,
we kind of oh sorry,
sorry
go
to
ahead, Andy.
interrupt there. No apologies. What system are you using? How are you going to measure it?
So I've been doing a lot of like demoing out there. I've kind of got it down to a couple. So we're just in the processes of finalizing it at the moment. And it'll be a standalone service in its own. You'll have those folks that just want to kind of come in and be like, hey, yeah, I've been hearing a lot about this. Like I see all these posts on social media nowadays talking about VO2 max this, VO2 max that. Like my VO2 max has to be high if I want to live long. So those folks can come in and just kind of get tested and know what their VO2 max is and come up and like come in and get follow-up tested to see if they're kind of increasing that metric. And then with our runners, we can also kind of like do some VO2 max testing So that way, if we're kind of like working with a runner to, either on the recovery side of things or on the performance side of things, we can more accurately kind of like tell them what their kind of training zones are and where they need to be when they're doing their various different runs as well.
It's okay for you to plug companies on here. It's no problem at all. So if there's of the two methodologies that you're using VO2, it's just good for other professionals to hear what you're considering.
Yeah. So I think honestly, the main one that we'll probably go with will be VO2 Master. They're just more of a portable unit where, they don't have those like big tubes and stuff that need to be connected to equipment. And they've been validated. So I think that for us just seems like a little bit more of a natural fit, because then also if we wanted to host like a pop-up and we wanted to be mobile and move somewhere, we can also be testing people pretty easily in other locations as well. And then another piece of equipment that we've kind of had for a little while now that I think has been a really big upgrade to our clinic has been a piece of equipment from this company called Beyond Power. It's called like the Voltra. It's just a great like kind of portable cable system. And they have all these various attachments that you can just attach it onto different things. In our clinic, like, what it does is essentially almost like eliminates the need for having a cable column. So for us, we have it just attached to our squat rack in the clinic, and you can slide it up and down. You can move it wherever you need to move it. And it has about 200 pounds of resistance behind it. And it's just like this little, like, kind of you can carry it and just move it around unit. So for what it does, it's amazing. And you can dial in, like, just from like, hey, I want 97 pounds on this. I want 16 pounds on this. So it's down to the pound. And there's all these different modes in it, which allow us to train with our clients, like, in different ways too. So you have your traditional kind of like when you're thinking about your cable column pulley system has that same type of resistance, but it also allows you to train kind of like the eccentric portion of a muscle action. It allows you to also do strength testing. Now, a recent upgrade in there allowed you to be able to measure forces as well too. So now we're able to kind of like measure from side to side, like how strong is X movement? Like, are we making progress towards closing the gap from this side to the other? Where traditionally we would kind of be using these like dynamometers in the clinic. And sometimes like the setup with that might be a little tougher. This is just makes it just so much easier for us. So we've been really enjoying using that in the clinic.
That's awesome. Yeah, some of those machines are massive to try to test strength. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Very
awesome.
true.
You've started to touch on this a little bit. You start talking about you're talking about therapy, in essence, almost a therapy session with your patients and your clients. So how do you ensure that the education of your clients or your patients is prioritized as part of the treatment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, that kind of goes, yeah, like you mentioned, kind of goes back into thinking about that philosophy before where, we talked about like two ears and one mouth. We really just prioritize our time that we have with each individual. Since we are one-on-one, and we kind of have like an hour-long block, we do get to sit down and truly like speak with each individual. And I think during that time is when a lot of our education happens. And like we're talking about all this different equipment and things like that, it's all very helpful, but at the end of the day, education is the most important and vital intervention that we have at the clinic. Hands down, bar none, nothing is going to beat that. I always tell people, like, you're coming into the clinic for X amount of hours a week. I might see you, like a couple times a week here, but for all that other time that you're out there, that your environment, that your actions can affect your physiology and your health ecosystem, that's where we're really kind of like getting the most dramatic changes. So it's kind of being able to educate people, sit down, talk to them about their training, talk to them about their lifestyle choices, their health ecosystem. That's where we impart the biggest change. And I think just from being able to have that time where we sit down with folks and educate them, but then also, yeah, we get them up, we get them moving as well. And that's where we can kind of educate them about, their technique, their form, how to progress certain things, how to regress certain things. So if you are having some pain with this is how you can modify this movement to still be able to stay as active as possible while we're working through this as well.
So we're going to have a lot of other PTs, we're going to have a lot of performance coaches and other professionals listening to this podcast. And I'm a great believer that one and one makes two, in essence, that if you find a problem or an issue and you find a common problem or issue, creating a service or a system to fix that problem or issue, particularly relates to pain, is going to make your business thrive. So in terms of you and Perfect Stride, separate these for me, but what are some of the most common movement patterns or injuries you see with high performing clients, but also desk bound professionals?
No, that's a great question. I think kind of like trying to like bring this back to like, being as simple as possible, I think how I always think about this is a very large majority of the people that come into our clinic, they're just ill prepared for the demands of what they were trying to do. I think that's what it always just comes down to, right? Like your tissues have a certain capacity, your nervous system, your body, your tissues has a certain capacity to withstand a certain amount of load or stress. And that injury, that pain kind of comes in when you surpass that threshold. And that's kind of like, like the way to just really kind of break it down and kind of think about it from a standpoint of whether you are a weekend warrior or whether you are like an elite professional athlete as well. There's just something going on there, whether it's like your training load just got too high over time, you didn't account for enough recovery, or you just got really gung ho at New Year's with your New Year's resolution and you're like, I'm going to hit the gym 5 times a week and I'm going to do this. And that came from like, previously doing nothing at all. I think that's kind of like the simplified version and way to think about that, right? That's where a very, very, very large majority of the folks we work with that come to us with a pain or an injury, that's how they'll come to us, is just doing something that they're just not prepared for and that they haven't worked up to.
And that's high performance and or someone sat behind a desk. It's the same premise.
Same premise, most definitely.
I like that. It takes it a step further than under recovery, right? It's always used to say with overtraining, it's usually not that, but it actually takes it much further and talks about tissues and just
Yeah,
preparation.
exactly. It's kind of like on two different ends of the spectrum, but it's kind of like thinking about that same formula. Sometimes you got to reel people back a little bit, but then the folks that are kind of on the lower end of the activity spectrum, they're kind of probably set, they're in a place where they're setting themselves up to potentially have a higher injury risk just because their capacity to stress and load is going to be lower. So
Mm-hmm.
for those folks, it's like, hey, we're trying to get them to do more so they're more resilient. Whereas the folks that are on the kind of like the higher end of the spectrum that are doing a lot, we just got to kind of manage that stress for them and tell them like, how maybe we need them to be recovering, where we need to deload a little bit more so that we can kind of optimize those training adaptations and get as resilient as possible too and get the best performance for them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What do you think is the one thing people think is helping them recover, but is actually working against them? What are people doing that they think is really helping them and isn't?
I'm just laughing there because I think right now you go on the world of the internet, right? And like
Yeah.
there is just like
Amen.
there's a lot going on out there for sure, like this claim, that claim, you gotta like, what I can't even like sometimes I just start laughing, literally laughing out loud when I see certain posts. Um at the end of the day, it's the basics. I think that's what people sometimes just really want, that magic bullet, that magic pill to kind of like get the results, but it is truly the basics. You got to get back to, you know, optimizing your training, your nutrition, your sleep, your stress, kind of that health ecosystem. And that is going to be the single best thing that you can do to help yourself recover. You don't need to be going to these like wellness spas or getting in your cold plunge or doing XYZ. It's just literally getting to the basics and doing the basics well.
That's quite fascinating that you mentioned all these recovery centers and cold plunge and etc. So are you saying that for certain people in certain circumstances, doing that is actually not helping them?
I think it can in certain instances where people are doing too much, right? And they're just adding another thing to their plate now where it's like, hey, I need to schedule in this 60-minute session twice a week to get these cold plunges that I'm doing. Or I got to travel to this sauna so I can get my sauna session in. Or, hey, I got to go do XYZ as my recovery day. I think that in those instances, it can be a little bit more detrimental. It's adding a little bit more stress to the ecosystem of taking time away from the other things that maybe people value or get joy from doing, right? So I think in that instance, it can be detrimental. And then, right now there's some preliminary research out there talking about how, if you do a cold plunge right after your bout of training, there can be some detrimental effects for positive adaptations as well. So like I said, sometimes it's kind of these like new things and just jumping on board to kind of trends blindly can be detrimental, right? Like we just haven't learned enough about it. There might be just some like, internet gurus plugging it a little bit more. We don't really know the ins and outs of it as well yet.
I think
So
I
in
did.
those instances, 100%.
I think I did see this. Was it something to do with it can negatively affect hypertrophy? Is that what their study was?
Yeah, exactly. So depending upon what your kind of like, your training goals are, right? That could be kind of like, preventing you from meeting those training goals. So, that's the biggest thing. That's like when we have our runners come in at the clinic, especially, and we talk to them about like, hey, your training schedule is going to be getting really busy as we get closer towards marathon day. Your time is going to be very limited. So we really want to make sure that we're kind of optimizing that to allow for you to have time to do things outside of training and work, right? If you have a full-time job and you're trying to get like 4 or 5 runs in a week, trying to get some strength training sessions in a week, you throw in the fact that you have a kid on top of that as well, time is going to be at very much at a premium. And then just kind of like, time to, be with your significant other, time to be with your friends, to do things that bring you joy outside of running gets very limited. And we know that those are also very beneficial for your journey as well, too. So I think that's where people sometimes just need to kind of scale back and just look at like, hey, am I sleeping well? How is my training looking? How is my stress right now? And kind of like, work on those things and the results will just come from that.
Is this a fair statement that not all inflammation is bad?
Yeah, no, most definitely. Inflammation is normal and it's natural, right? I think, you know, it occurs for a reason. It occurs to promote healing in our body and get those chemical mediators working that promote healing from an injury or recovery. It's that kind of like when that process gets broken and we kind of have chronic inflammation, that's where some problems stem from. But I 100% will say yes, inflammation is a great thing, and your body should be kind of experiencing that to recover.
And
Yeah.
is this the point that you were making? And then if you then take any type of treatment that, in essence, takes away that natural thing, it can affect the overall results. Is that what you were talking about?
Well, I think it's more than that, right? I like the way you put it on, it can be detrimental, but it's the reason behind why you're doing it. So some of these wellness centers going to them as an event, as a social outing, that's not negative, right? But it's what does it mean to you and what is it doing to you and why are you doing it, I think
I see.
is more of,
Okay.
is that correct?
100%. Yeah, I think like I said, that kind of it like yeah, you're having like a friend's birthday, right? You're going out to this like wellness spa. You're relaxed about it. It's something you're looking forward to doing. You're gonna be with like, you're developing your social network, social bonds, having a laugh. I think those are all really positive things versus it being like, where do I squeeze this in on my like busy schedule? Now I can't go have dinner with this person because I have to go here and do this cold plunge that I was told to do, right? Like,
Yeah, you're
I
just
think those
stressed
are
out
very
about
two different kind of
Okay.
like, two
Got it.
different kind of buckets to be in there.
Cool. So I'm sure you have a lot of high performers in your clinic. How do you work with clients that are trying to stay active, but managing the chronic pain, the chronic inflammation, and the recurring issues that we've been talking about? And I'm sure it's a lot more of a mental game maybe than a physical, but how do you work with those folks?
Got it. So just kind of making sure I understood the question fully, right? So yeah, kind of thinking about those high performers coming in that are, struggling with pain that they've been experiencing for quite an extended period of time. How do we kind of like navigate that and work with those folks?
Yeah, and I'm sure some of it's a mental game, right? But what do you do to make sure that you're helping them progress? Because I'm sure it can be difficult.
Yeah, no, very, very much so. And I think kind of like over the years, we've gotten like a reputation in the city where, we will kind of end up seeing folks who quote unquote have had like failed rehab, didn't have, or I guess just didn't have a great experience with past like rehab providers. So we do get this a lot in the clinic where we'll have folks coming in talking about how they've been having X pain for X amount of years at this point now. So that's something, we definitely have like a lot of unpacking to do with these folks. And I think once again, a lot of times just listening really kind of like unravels that and kind of gets to a lot of the pertinent points that you need to be kind of taking out of that. And that's where I think just kind of like, how we talked about earlier, that's where we shine, is the ability just to be able to sit down, listen, understand their story. Where have they been? Where are they currently? Where are they trying to go? And what are their goals? What has worked, what hasn't been working for them, and really kind of like formulating a plan together with them, right? I think that's the part of it that is very crucial, is like, once again, not no protocols, no cookie cutter kind of treatments. It's a personalized approach. And then also educating them, right? To let them know that, hey, you know, this experience has been going on for quite some time. And we need to kind of like, we're gonna have to work towards getting you to where you want. And it's not going to be a light switch. It's not going to be like, hey, I'm okay today, and then I'm going to wake up tomorrow and be completely fine. It's going to be those like little wins that you have to, kind of celebrate along the way, where it's like, hey, I can now run for X minutes before I have pain, or the pain intensity was lower when I was doing these things now. Those are all kind of wins. And, I think for us, it's a lot of our success also comes from finding what is that individual able to do, because a lot of times, like we always say, like the nervous system never forgets, the brain never forgets. So there's a lot of past trauma that can be associated with these injuries, because it's taken away something that may have been a part of their identity in the past, right? They may have been a very successful fast runner, and now that identity has been like taken away from them because they've been working through this injury. They haven't been able to get to that level of performance that they were at before, and that kind of creates this like kind of like negative spiral where that movement starts to become very sensitized, and their nervous system, their body kind of starts to perceive it as a threat. So now anytime they go out there and try to do this one thing, they kind of start to experience pain. They start kind of being less physically active as a result of that. Depression is a very real thing that may kind of also be having to be a part of the discussion as well at this point. So for us, it's kind of trying to be really positive, reframe kind of like rehab to be a fun experience, and get them to that point where they're celebrating the wins, and we're being their cheerleader and celebrating those wins along with them, to show them how they're progressing and how we're working towards kind of like, reframing this rehab to get them to their goals as well.
And what's the commonality, do you think? Is it fear of failure? Is it relinquishing control? I mean, what do you think it is? I know there's different drivers for different folks, but there's got to be a common link.
I mean, I think the common link kind of comes down to just, I think a lot of the high performers that we have, I think it's like I mentioned, it's like their identity, right? You start to
Mm.
associate yourself with something when you've been doing it for so long, and you're at a certain, I mean, even for folks who aren't at a high performance level, but just even for yourself, like, if you ran your first marathon, that's a very big feat, right? Like a very small percentage of the world can say that they've run a marathon. It starts to kind of like build on this like positive identity that you have of yourself, and kind of like how you're doing something for yourself, you're growing, you're getting better. So I think that's that commonality, is it's like kind of taking away from that person's identity where, hey, I'm no longer able to be a mother because I can't lift my child, or like I can't be a father because I can't lift my child. I can't do XYZ at work, so I am no longer like the best at my work now. So it's kind of that, like that, whatever that identity you have, that it's being taken away. So I think for us, that's very important for us, is every decision that we make in rehab, we tie back to that. It has to come back to that pain point and that identity, so they can understand along the entire journey, this is how we're working towards getting you back to that place.
Um, okay, let me just ask you a slightly different question. So, I don't have pain. I'm a client of yours. I'm not currently injured. What are you going to do with me to help me stay resilient?
Well, we're going to do a lot of things, Andy.
You're
I
right.
think this is
You've heard about me then. Okay, you've heard about my physical prowess.
just from our little chat earlier. I know I got a
Yeah,
little bit of
Yeah.
information about you
just
already,
send a check for 20 grand and I might be able to help you.
Yeah. Good luck.
So this is cool. I mean, I think this is something I'm like really, it's been really exciting to see. I think just kind of the general public's understanding of physical therapy has changed a lot over the years. I think we get a lot of people now that come to us like from that prehab preventative aspect of things, where they understand that we can work with them in that capacity. Um, I have a lot of people like, before they start their marathon training blocks or whatever it might be, they'll kind of just come in and say, hey, you know what, like it's that time of year right now. I want to make sure that I'm kind of like getting the guidance that I need. I'm starting off on the right foot. I'm setting myself up for success. So I'm going to come to you to kind of like, coach me through and help me get to this end goal. And it's kind of like become our bread and butter, right? Like I was talking about like that world of performance therapy a little bit. So we definitely kind of like work with people very closely in that respect where we will, um, kind of like whether it's kind of formulating like a sustainable, smart training program for them, whether it's like strength training, whether it's running, and kind of working through while we're also kind of like, assessing their movement, assessing their body to help improve, like, and optimize where we can if there's deficits in their mobility, stability, strength, power output. So we're kind of really like digging in and just really trying to set this individual up to have the most success that they can for not just whatever endeavor they have performance related, but for kind of like the long term and the rest of their life as well.
Are you using tech to help them with that? Are you using things like True Coach, or are you using things like that to support them?
We have kind of a few different like kind of things that we will use to kind of like, program people in the clinic. For our runners, we have Training Peaks, which we've been
Okay,
using
yeah,
quite a while
yeah,
for like programming them. And then kind of some of that previously mentioned tech, right? Like we have dynamometers, we have kind of like the Vultra unit that kind of allows us to measure output a little bit more, so that way we can see, hey, where are we at baseline, and then after we've kind of intervened and we've done what we wanted, are we truly kind of like moving the needle on this? Are we moving in the right direction? And then, if we're not, obviously we need to kind of steer the ship in a different direction and try some different things. But if we are, awesome, let's kind of like lean into this and continue to adapt and kind of make those positive changes that we've been making with you.
Okay, let's just switch it a little bit. Let's talk about your business. Let's talk about your business model, because we'll have a lot of people who are listening here who are starting off. They're in that place you said you started with. They're swimming in clients. They don't know how to build a business. They take it to another level. So you've built a very reputation-driven brand in a super competitive market in New York. Uh, what's been most crucial for you building trust and loyalty with your clients?
I think the biggest thing for this, like, over that I've kind of like realized over the years, when we first started, it was very like kind of like, kind of having that, hey, like we got to get out there and like marketing, right? Like we got to market, market, market. I think that's obviously very, very important. People need to know that you're out there and they need to know how you can help solve their problems. But I think the single best thing that you can do for marketing is provide a phenomenal experience to each and every individual that comes through your doors, right? I think that if you can do that, you are setting yourself up for success, because then that one individual is never going to hesitate to come back to you. That one individual is never going to hesitate to speak highly of you whenever somebody brings up like an ache, pain, performance related issue that they're having. They're going to kind of be your biggest cheerleaders out in the community for you as well too. So
Yeah.
I think just really kind of that human element is kind of like the most important thing that you can be doing, is just, kind of like we talked about, sitting down and just really kind of like gaining the trust of this individual and kind of like being there for them and with them through their journey with you, and letting them know that, you're a human as well, and you're going to do your best to help them kind of get to their goals.
Yeah. Along those same lines, you've likely mentored other clinicians. How do you help them balance clinical expertise with communication, with education, with empathy? What's that balance there?
Yeah, and that's a big one too, because I think, coming out of school, generally speaking, it's like very much so people are driven about like, just learning more, but learning more about kind of like, exercise integration, exercise kind of like progression, regression, physiology, training, and things of that nature. I think kind of like one of the more overlooked aspects of, being a healthcare professional is communication, right? I think that's something where we get some minimal training on that. And a lot of these courses, I just feel as though it's not that sexy thing. It's not like that new shiny piece of equipment. It's not that like Instagrammable exercise that, like, you're on your head pulling a cable while you're standing on a physio ball scenario.
Mm.
So it kind of really gets overlooked a lot, but I think that's something where, we work at the clinic to kind of drive that point home, like that this is, like we talked about before, education is the single biggest kind of intervention that we can provide people to set them up for success. So that goes into the nitty gritty of like, helping people understand how the words that we use impact and affect individuals as well, how kind of like reframing things can help individuals as well too, to kind of like think about things differently, think about movements differently a little bit as well. And then kind of like I was talking about previously, I think that human element, right? Like the biggest thing for us is at the clinic, I always tell people, right? Like you should be having fun. You should be joking. You should be kind of like developing rapport with your clients, because if you don't have that, we just know that you're not going to get the best outcomes as well, because that individual is not going to fully trust you. They're not going to be having an enjoyable experience with you as well. And that's going to be kind of detrimental to where we want to go with that individual.
Yeah, sure. Have you found any ways to bring community or education outside of your four walls? Do you guys do workshops or partnerships or events or anything like that?
100%. We're always kind of looking to grow in our community. That's something, I think we can always be better with. Being a small business, I think, we kind of have some of our limitations with that, but we're always kind of like, challenging ourselves to be better with that and get out in our community, whether it's like doing, various different pop-ups, with like the NYC marathon that comes up this year. We'll try to kind of get out there and do various like, maybe shakeout runs, kind of have like workshops in our community. We recently, earlier this year, did like kind of like a little like multidisciplinary workshop where we had like a sports dietitian. We had kind of also like a behavioral coach as well that came in alongside myself and had like a workshop for the members of the community. It was free. Come in, kind of like, we'll talk to you about like, what we do, what are some of the biggest mistakes we see with the clients we work with, the runners that we work with, and how do we improve those. We have running groups that come into the clinic as well, where we'll do kind of different workshops with them to maybe help them understand how they're moving, how can they improve their movement a little bit more too. And then another thing I think that we do that's cool, that sets us apart from other clinics, is we kind of bring in like 3 continuing education courses every year into the clinic. And all our clinicians take them, but then we open them up to the public as well, so other
Oh, very cool.
clinicians can come in and also learn with us as well. So I think that kind of really helps us foster community, where we're meeting other rehab professionals, healthcare professionals, and then also getting to meet and kind of learn from some of the best and brightest minds that are out there regarding that specific subject matter too.
Yeah, that's certainly what we're trying to do here with this podcast, is to bring people like you to share your good practices, etc. One of the things that we've added to this podcast at the end now, just for a bit of fun, is a quick fire round. So you have to
Okay.
answer these questions in 10 seconds or less.
Ooh,
Okay.
okay.
And it could be yes, no, it's your perspective, etc. So,
Okay.
um, is one of your treatments me putting on high heels, standing on top of a dumbbell, and crossing my legs and drinking a cup of coffee? Yes or no? Should I do that?
Maybe. If that's what your goal is, yes.
um, Someone here listening, struggling with pain, can't find the right provider. What's the advice in them navigating the system, finding the right care? What do you suggest they do?
10 seconds or less. I think being able to reach out and speak kind of with your that potential provider first, that kind of, or whoever you may be interviewing, I think that goes a really long way, just to see if your kind of thoughts and kind of like
You're
your kind of
comfortable.
like relationship kind of gels in that respect. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Give me 3 things that you've changed your mind about in the last few years in terms of movement, rehab, or recovery.
3 things in the last few years. Oh wow.
2 doesn't matter. It's just give me some things you've changed your mind about in movement, rehab, or recovery.
Um, I think kind of it's like more about like just when I reflect on what I do, kind of like what hasn't been working and what has been working. It's more just once again getting into like the nuances of things, like really investigating what that individual has been doing with themselves to affect their physiology. So I think earlier I mentioned getting a better understanding of what their step count is, kind of getting a better understanding of just like their relationships and kind of how that affects their stress a little bit more too, right? I think some of those things are things that I've been really working towards, kind of like improving my own practice, not just like, hey,
Okay.
this is exercise, but more just kind of like, hey, these are the nuances of that individual and how do I impact those.
Okay, cool. And then last quick fire question for you. What's the one non-negotiable practice that you personally do for your body every week?
Oh, that's a good one.
Oh, okay. So actually, I had that this morning. I have kind of pre-programmed, like I think a lot of people will do this. I pre-program meetings on the calendar for my training, like my own workout times,
Okay.
and nothing gets scheduled over those. So that's kind of, I think, my way to ensure that I get my movement and I get my training in every week.
Okay.
That's an awesome
That
one.
is a good
That's an
one.
awesome one.
Yeah. Especially as a business owner, I'm sure that's hard.
For sure, things always come up. You always got to put fires out, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So, in closing, we always wrap up with our core values. And the core values of this podcast are strength, kindness, and perspective. And so, kindness is one thing we like to end with. Is there anyone that you'd like to give a shout out to, maybe a mentor, friend, coach who has deeply influenced or inspired your journey?
I think when it comes to, for kindness, I think my dad has always just been my like number one biggest inspiration. I think he has been that person who has inspired like me to be who I am today, and kind of like a little, initially like my business philosophy as well. Like, I think the hardworking aspect of it I really get from him. And I think just kind of like that idea of just being kind to everybody. He's a, first generation immigrant. Like we kind of have like, an Indian restaurant that's been around for 30 years in Portland, Maine,
That's
just
awesome.
outside of Portland, Maine, called Bombay Mahal. I'll shout out my dad's business there.
Yeah, awesome.
Um, and he's been in there for 30 years. He's like, 73 now, still working 6 days a week in the kitchen at his own business, and he always has a smile on his face. Like he's always joking with his workers. He's always in there in the dining room, smiling, being kind to everybody in the dining room, developing these relationships now he's had for 30 years there. So he's always kind of like my inspiration when it comes to kindness, for sure.